October 27, 1962. A Soviet submarine sits motionless beneath the Atlantic Ocean. Its radio is dead. Depth charges are exploding around it. The crew has been without fresh air for days. The captain, a man named Valentin Savitsky, believes World War III has already begun. He has one nuclear torpedo on board, and he is ready to fire it. What happened next was kept classified for nearly 40 years, and when the truth finally came out, historians said it plainly: we came closer to nuclear annihilation than anyone knew. This is the story of 13 days that nearly ended the world. It started with a photograph. On October 14, 1962, an American U-2 spy plane flew silently over western Cuba at 70,000 feet. The pilot didn't know what he was photographing. But when the film was developed the next morning and handed to intelligence analysts in Washington, the room went quiet. There they were, Soviet ballistic missile sites, under construction on an island 90 miles from the coast of Florida. The missiles could carry nuclear warheads. They had a range of over 1,000 miles. That meant New York, Washington, Chicago, all within reach. President John F. Kennedy was told at 8:45 in the morning on October 16th. He immediately assembled a secret group of advisors, later called ExComm, the Executive Committee of the National Security Council. They would meet in secret for the next 13 days, hidden from the press, hidden from the public, hidden from the world. The question on the table was simple and terrifying. What do we do? Some advisors wanted an immediate airstrike, bomb the missile sites before they became operational. Others wanted a full military invasion, tens of thousands of troops storming the beaches of Cuba. Kennedy listened, and he hesitated, because he understood something the hawks in the room didn't fully grasp. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev was not irrational. He was not suicidal. And if America struck first, if they killed Soviet soldiers on Cuban soil, Khrushchev would have no choice but to respond. That response would be nuclear. Instead, Kennedy chose a middle path, a naval blockade, which they carefully called a quarantine, because a blockade is technically an act of war. American warships would form a line around Cuba. No Soviet ships carrying military equipment would be allowed through. On October 22nd, Kennedy went on national television. He told the American people everything. The reaction was immediate. People began stockpiling food. Gas stations ran dry. Families drove out of cities. Civil defense officials estimated that a nuclear strike on New York City would kill 2.8 million people in the first hour. The doomsday clock, which had sat at 7 minutes to midnight, moved to 2. On October 24th, the blockade went live. Soviet ships were steaming toward Cuba. American warships were waiting. The world held its breath. In the White House Situation Room, an aide passed a note to Secretary of State Dean Rusk. The Soviet ships had stopped. Rusk turned to National Security Advisor George Bundy and said, "We're eyeball to eyeball, and I think the other fellow just blinked." But the crisis was far from over. The missiles already in Cuba were still being assembled. Soviet technicians were working around the clock. American reconnaissance flights showed the sites getting closer and closer to operational status. Intelligence estimated that within days, the missiles could be armed and ready to launch. Behind the scenes, Khrushchev and Kennedy were exchanging urgent letters. Khrushchev's first letter, sent October 26th, was long, emotional, almost desperate. He wrote, "We and you ought not now to pull on the ends of the rope in which you have tied the knot of war, because the more the two of us pull, the tighter that knot will be tied." It was the closest thing to a peace offer Kennedy had received. But then, the next day, a second letter arrived. This one was harder, more formal. It felt like it had been written by committee. It demanded that America remove its own missiles from Turkey in exchange for the Soviet withdrawal from Cuba. Kennedy's advisors were divided. Some saw it as a trap, others saw it as a lifeline, and then everything nearly fell apart. On the morning of October 27th, a day that would later be called Black Saturday, an American U-2 spy plane was shot down over Cuba. The pilot, Major Rudolph Anderson, was killed. He would be the only direct combat fatality of the entire crisis. Military commanders urged Kennedy to retaliate immediately. Protocol called for it. Kennedy refused. Hours later, a second U-2 accidentally strayed into Soviet airspace over Alaska. Soviet fighter jets scrambled to intercept. American jets scrambled to escort the U-2 out. For a brief, terrifying window, American and Soviet fighters were in the air together, locked in a situation that could have turned catastrophic from a single nervous trigger finger. Kennedy was told. His response? There's always some son of a bitch who doesn't get the word. But the most dangerous moment of the entire crisis, the one that wasn't known for decades, was happening 300 feet underwater. The Soviet submarine B-59 had been at sea for weeks. It was a diesel-electric sub, which meant it needed to surface regularly to recharge its batteries and get fresh air. But the crew hadn't surfaced in days. The temperature inside had reached over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Carbon dioxide levels were rising. Men were passing out. And then the depth charges started. American destroyers had detected the submarine and were dropping practice depth charges, small explosives meant to signal the sub to surface and identify itself. They were not meant to be lethal, but the crew of B-59 didn't know that. Captain Valentin Savitsky had lost contact with Moscow. He had no idea whether war had started. He had no way of knowing the depth charges weren't the real thing, and the B-59 was armed with a nuclear torpedo. Unlike American nuclear weapons, which required dual authorization to fire, Soviet protocol at the time allowed a submarine captain to launch under certain conditions if he believed an attack was underway and could not reach command. Savitsky made his decision. He ordered the torpedo to be armed. His political officer, Ivan Maslenikov, agreed. But there was a third officer on board who had the authority to object. His name was Vasily Arkhipov. He was the flotilla commander, and all three men had to agree for the launch to proceed. Arkhipov said no. He argued with Savitsky for what witnesses later described as a tense, heated exchange. He insisted they surface, identify themselves, find out what was actually happening. Eventually, Savitsky stood down. The B-59 surfaced, the depth charges stopped, the crisis slowly began to wind down. Vasily Arkhipov's name was classified for decades. When his story finally became public in 2002, Thomas Blanton of the National Security Archive said it plainly. A man named Vasily Arkhipov saved the world. On October 28th, Khrushchev announced on Radio Moscow that the Soviet missiles would be dismantled and removed from Cuba. Kennedy pledged publicly that the United States would not invade Cuba. Privately, in a secret deal that wasn't revealed to the American public for 25 years, Kennedy also agreed to remove American Jupiter missiles from Turkey within 6 months. Both sides claimed victory. Both sides had compromised. In the months that followed, a direct hotline was established between Washington and Moscow, the famous red phone, so that the two leaders could communicate instantly in future crises, rather than relying on letters that took hours to deliver. The world exhaled. But here's what history textbooks rarely tell you. The resolution of the Cuban Missile Crisis wasn't the result of military strength. It wasn't the blockade. It wasn't the threat of airstrikes. It was three men in a sweltering submarine 300 feet underwater, arguing over whether to end the world. One man said no, and that was enough. If you want to know about the other moments in history, one decision changed everything. This is the channel for you. Subscribe to World Rewind.